the McMinnville City Council. I'd like to call the meeting to order and call on Susan Muir, our Parks and Rec Director, to introduce our topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to share my screen here. One second. Thank you. Okay, there we go. I just emailed this to you a little bit earlier, and so if you want to follow along on your computers, you should have it now on your email. If you have tech issues, I will try and use the slides on the screen for you. So my name is Susan Muir. I'm the Parks and Recreation Director, and I was going back through my notes about the last time we officially talked about this project, and it was February of 2022. You know, if you think about the calendar, it doesn't seem that long ago, but it was a completely different world in February of 22. We had different elected officials, different staff, the economy, just a lot of things have completely changed for us. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to brief you on what's happened in the last 18 months since February of 22, and then also to talk about next steps. And I'll give a little bit of a background summary for everybody so that we all are on the same page about what has been happening, because this project has been going on for 4 years. And so we have had a lot of conversations about it. Okay, so the project timeline, we really started in 2018, but in 2019 we received what's kind of the foundational information and data for this project and for probably many projects to come. That was what we call the FCAs, or the Facility Condition Assessment. We had 57 city-owned buildings looked at as that project, and the purpose of that was to help us focus on priorities for capital improvements and also maintenance requirements. So this conversation has come up for you a number of times, and how we use those reports. They have been fed into the budget to some degree, and then also were a good starting point for this project about library and recreation facility planning. So in 2020, we took the facility condition assessments, which talked about the dollar amounts that would need to be put into the buildings, and we looked at what should we do with the community center and the aquatic center. Those were two of the buildings that fared the worst on the facility condition assessment. And so taking that technical information, building in a public input and a public communication process where we could hear from the community what they wanted us to do in our rec buildings, led us to deliver what we call phase 1, or the feasibility study of those buildings. And that concluded with you all directing us to look at replacing the two buildings, the aquatic center and the community center, with one new joint facility. And at the time, the concept was those bringing two front desks together, bringing two maintenance teams together would help share some financial resources and hopefully make it a better location and a better place for our community if they just had one place to go. You also directed us when you said look for one new building, bring in the senior center and the library into that conversation as well, because we have a lot of similar patrons and offer some services at all of the facilities together. So that was 2020. And then in 2021, this is where we brought the group that became known as MacPac into the table and into the planning. And that was a long process. We kicked it off when COVID started. I think we had 2 meetings in person before we had to go online and learn how to use Zoom as a community and really run a 20-member community group as a new with new technology through Zoom. So through a 2-year process, and that group really leaned into this project and really spent a lot of time and energy on it. One bullet on this slide doesn't do it justice, but essentially they made a recommendation to you in early '22 for one new rec center. They had 2 preferred locations. Those 2 locations were property owned by Linfield, and then the Mac Water and Light property, kind of uphill from Joe Dancer. They made some recommendations about the operations of the building, what should be programmed in the building, and even had some design concepts. Basically, for the new rec center, we were looking at 125,000 square feet at approximately $111 million. Now, I will say at the time we did that, those dollar amounts were escalated to March of '23, but again, the economy has completely changed since those were escalated, and so I think those numbers obviously would need to be redone and updated. The MacPac group also recommended some senior center improvements in the amount of about $3.5 million, and then a new library at the location of the existing aquatic center of about 30,000 square feet at about $25 million. These were all concept recommendations, and that's going to be an important part of this, what you'll hear me talking about tonight. So that was the recommendation that was delivered to you in January of '22, and then in February, I came back to you with a work plan that included next steps. And most of those next steps were related to figuring out an operating budget, engaging with the community and doing public involvement, which we hadn't yet had a chance to do, because if you'll remember, when MacPac delivered their recommendation to you, one of the things that they said was, we don't feel like we can move forward with a financial recommendation until some of the foundational issues with the city's budget are corrected. It was difficult to come up with a full operating budget, and it was also difficult to think about a capital investment in a new building when we weren't able to keep up with our current buildings and our current maintenance needs. So at that point, after you all approved that work plan, as you know, the Budget Committee and the City Council really started working on city finances. We put the facility planning project on hold. As a matter of fact, the budget that was assigned to the work plan that you approved in February of '22 got shifted over to the fire district conversation and was utilized for that process. So we essentially put this project for facility planning for recreation and library projects on hold. While we did that, the council moved forward on the city service fee, and the fire district, as we know, was just most recently approved. So what's happened since then? The city manager, Jeff, and I had a work group, a very informal group that got together a couple of times, and while we were waiting for the outcome of the fire district conversation, we asked them, what do you think the next step should be for us as we start to think about potentially a capital bond, just to get a feel for timing, to get a feel for what questions might be out there, and just to get a pulse of the community. It was a small group. It was Kevin Chambers, Dave Rucklos, Patty Lum, Peter Hofstetter, Jake Wheeler from Praxis was on that, and Teresa Smith were on that small group. Their recommendations were that the most important thing that we needed to do first was figure out the location for the new rec center, that had too many unknowns in it for our community, and we'd also heard from several other agencies and cities that had tried to put capital bond measures forward, that the location is just really critical because people need to know where it is in order to understand what it might mean to them. The other thing the city manager work group wanted to make sure we did was complete the dollars and cents process. That did not have that cute name at the time that they made that recommendation, but now it does, and so that is off and running, but they thought that was a really important thing to make sure that we're done with that process before any other conversations about costs and budgets for this project were had. Obviously, the buildings and locations and the costs needed to be more specific than what was prepared in the MacPac report. We always knew that. We knew it was a concept plan and that we needed to take all of the concepts in there, including locations, out to the community and hear from them. We also know, thanks to Jake and his specialty in polling, that polling will be a really important part for this project in order to determine the community support levels for the different scenarios. So that means, what do we include in the potential capital bond? How do we look at that? Do we phase it? We've talked about that before as well. So really making sure that we go through a thoughtful process and go back and engage with the community on that was critical for this group. And then they also really wanted us to build out an informational financial forecast for the taxpayers. And I know this has come up even since that committee was meeting, but they wanted to make sure that we include the city's current debt and timing to show the net impact of funding, and really just being completely transparent with all of the conversations we're having related to funding and taxpayer dollars. So making sure that was a critical component of what came next. And then also we have always had this on our list of things that we knew we wanted to do as a part of this project, which was start a capital campaign so that we could leverage our resources and demonstrate those partnerships out in our community. So that was February of '23. You've had a couple of meetings with the school board, joint meetings where this has also come up, and we've talked about some of the opportunities that have happened in the last 18 months. And also some of the challenges. But if you'll recall back to the MACPAC recommendation, one of the things that we didn't get a chance to look at in great detail was the outdoor spaces. And knowing that the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Master Plan was coming up, it was really important to the MACPAC group that we look at the outdoor amenities as part of that overall city parks plan. A couple of reasons for that is until we know the location, we won't know how it can integrate. So in other words, if the PROS plan comes out and says this area of town that you happen to be locating a new rec center at really needs these types of park amenities, then maybe we can look at doing that as part of the indoor facility. So we think that's a great opportunity, and that's moving along, as you know. So we'll be able to really incorporate the indoor and outdoor spaces. We know the city's current leadership has a lot of strength and alignment around goals and priorities, and so building on that will be important. Developing new partnerships and solidifying existing partnerships. In the conversations that we've been having, administrative staff to administrative staff with these organizations have gone really well. I think if anything, it just shows that we do have a lot of partners and we all are willing to come to the table and be creative about things. And that's the next bullet is we have often said we are not afraid of any conversation about how to serve the community with its recreational needs, and we're very open to outside the box ideas. We also know there's some community momentum now with MACPAC having made their recommendation. We really felt that energy is that. And then it also ignited at the time, we were talking about it as a think big project. And so we've been continuing on those same paths. The challenges, we know the buildings continue to decline. We just had to reach out to our finance director, Jennifer Cuellar, yesterday or the day before about an HVAC situation at the senior center, which we think is in better shape than some others. That was an unexpected cost that we will be facing, and you'll be hearing more about that. But the buildings do continue to decline. We've had more leaks at the pool where we had to take up some concrete. As I mentioned, the HVAC situation at the senior center. So we're watching that. And we are also deliberately not trying to make big capital investments in those buildings until we have official direction from you all. We are worried a little bit about the loss of community enthusiasm. We know that construction prices are continuing to increase, and a lot of places that are going out for bid right now are being shocked by the construction costs that they're seeing come back. The location is and will continue to be a challenge for a little while. We know the city's long-term finances are starting to look different for us, and we're excited about that, but that's always an issue. The one thing we've said through this, and the one thing that MACPAC was also very consistent about, is we don't want to construct a building that we don't have enough money to operate and maintain responsibly. We don't want to be in the situation that we're in with the buildings, having so much deferred maintenance that it's hard to come back from that. So we know that's a big issue. We also know that there are several other city facilities that are in not great shape as well, and so balancing those needs is important. And then also related to the dollars and cents is really making sure that we incorporate the community voice in this, because there are other, obviously, city community priorities as we go through this. So the property and location updates, I want to talk just about the rec center portion of the MACPAC recommendation first. They recommended two preferred sites, like I mentioned earlier, the Linfield property and then the Mac Water and Light. So just to bring everybody up to speed, we had a memorandum of understanding with Linfield University back in 2021, and if you'll recall, they did not renew that memorandum of understanding. In 2022, they developed their strategic plan and published it, and it outlined Linfield's need to diversify revenue through campus master planning and future use of their properties. So we know that's the status of that. We have continued to have conversation with them. We just took a team of the exec team over to do a tour, so we're continuing to have conversations with them, but we know they're a ways out from trying to figure out how that diversification of revenue fits into their property and master planning. The Mac Water and Light property, we are having ongoing conversations about that. The Mac Water and Light Board has had discussions and been receiving information from the staff there about surplus property and how they would manage through a process if they wanted to dispose of any of their surplus property. And as staff, we have also talked to them about a memorandum of understanding, much like we did with Linfield University. So we expect those conversations to continue as well. And then I wanted to follow up on some of the conversations that happened at the joint McMinnville School District Board and City Council meetings. You've had a couple of those since we met in 22, and most recently in March of 23. I wanted to let you know several conversations happened there about whether or not any of the school district properties might be good locations for a rec center. And since that meeting, we have kept in touch with Superintendent Brockett, and she has let us know that they will be maintaining their properties for their 3 future school sites, and they are not interested in speaking about that being a rec center properties. But again, with all 3 of these agencies, we continue to have great partnership conversations and talking about how we can support each other as we move through these conversations. The other updates and next steps, I just want to reiterate that the library concepts, including the location, need more analysis and public engagement. So that part of the project came in after the rec center conversation had moved forward a little bit. And so we know we need to go back out to the community and find out how they feel about either adding on or building new at a different location. And we just know how important that historic structure there at the Carnegie Library is very important to us. So we want to make sure we do a robust process thinking about the future library. And then we're drafting a request for proposal right now to get out on the streets to engage an architect and consultant team. We think this will be a pretty big project for an architectural team to come in. We expect that to have 4 components to it. One will be the right sizing of the rec center, and there'll be a public engagement component of that because if you recall, we stopped that public engagement component while we got to the financial part. We think that will be something that can take those concept plans that MacPac had and a budget and figure out how we evolve that concept into a reality that we can hopefully put out for the community to decide if they want to fund or not. In this year's budget, we budgeted for a bathroom remodel at the senior center, which was a component of the MacPac recommendation. And so we hope that this RFP would also include some design services to get that project off and running. We also want to make sure that again, I said this before, but make sure that the library planning really has time to get out there and hear from the community about that. And then we also want to include in that an overall city building master plan project for downtown properties, which will include something that we've talked about as well, which is the future reuse of the community center and what the city might like to do as part of that. We think that's a critical component of building a new building is what happens to the old building. And certainly it's one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, but what will happen to the community center? So we need to talk about that with our community and find out how they would like to proceed. So really tonight is to allow us to pick the project back up, give you the update on the properties. We have really focused and really highlighted the property conversations to be the highest priority for us so that we can answer that first question that the community group thinks we need to do, which is look for a piece of property before we move forward with the funding plan. So that's really the update. That was a pretty quick presentation. We're here to answer any questions. I know a couple of things that I had on my notes from back in 2022 is to bring forward some green building conversations for you all to think about in terms of how much we want to invest in green building and what those trade-offs might be in terms of cost versus efficiencies and long-term life cycle of the building. So we'll be looking at that as part of this as well. Keeping the equity and inclusion lens component and all of that work that MacPac did. on the table is going to be another important part of it. And as I mentioned, the outdoor amenities, I know there's been some conversation about the concept plans that we had, including the concept site plans. There was a lot of parking lot on the concept plans, and we think now, once we have a site, we'll be able to look at that a lot differently with the pros plan also coming online so that we know exactly what we need in which areas of town. So we're excited to pick this back up and bring those parts of the project forward, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. We'll just open up and start with Councilor Peralta and go down the dais.
No questions. Thanks, Mayor.
Councilor Menke.
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Chenoweth.
So I just want to be clear. At this point, the Linfield property is out of discussions, basically, because they're going a different direction. It could come back.
Did you say is out of the conversation?
Yeah.
We can, I mean, I'm thinking the last conversation we had with them was probably about a month ago, so we do continue to talk to them about it.
But on their side of the discussion, it's off the table.
I would say what I understand is that they want to get through their master planning process and they don't have a completion date. And so they're not willing to engage in an MOU until they're through their master planning. Would you say that's an accurate recap?
Absolutely.
Okay, and then MSD 40 more clearly is, they're off the table.
Yes, we have, as late as today, I've checked in with Superintendent Brockett on that.
Okay, so at this point, what are we looking at as potential sites? Linfield must still be there. I know it was on that sheet, but what about, is Wortman Park still, that's off the table?
No, MacPac did not, made a conscientious decision to not recommend that any parkland be taken off of the inventory and that it needed to happen on a piece of property that was not currently developed as a park.
One of my concerns in what I'm seeing is we're delaying doing the necessary maintenance to existing buildings, partly for funding, partly because of a hope to go forward with new buildings, and letting them kind of, we're going to have major problems if we continue down this path. I honestly don't have a lot of hope for Linfield College property. I can't see it being in their best interest at any point in time to work with us on that. And so that leaves Mac Water and Light then as the only remaining properties that are available potentially if we have a partner that works with us. I'm concerned about the stalling of maintenance, and I'm not sure how to phrase this in a question, but I don't want to see our existing structures come down around us in the hopes that we're going to be able to build something new in the next 15 years. So I hope that in this process that is being gelled discussion point, and it's not just being ignored because of this hope we have for the MacPac. I guess is where I want to.
I'm happy to respond to that. I mean, I think if you look at our budget this year, I mean, we did a $90,000 carpet replacement in the community center because it simply had to be done at this point. And I think we have, 20 years of deferred maintenance and making a plan to address both, from my perspective, making a plan to address both deferred maintenance while planning on these next steps is kind of that. It is, to your point, I think you actually encapsulated what this process is, which is figuring out the options going forward and how not to throw good money after bad money while not allowing the buildings to continue to decline.
Maybe I can be more blunt. My sense is that I don't see a path forward to a new building at this point. And I'm very concerned that what we're doing in the hopes that we're going to eventually have a path forward is forcing ourselves to have nothing because everything's going to be crumbling because we're only doing the absolute bare minimum. And I don't want to see that happen. I understand the hope for MacPac. I understand the hope for these buildings, but the last ticket price I saw was $140 million. We don't even have land to put it on. It doesn't seem very realistic to me. So I feel like we need to be putting more effort into the maintenance side of this than we've been doing, and that's my concern.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Chenoweth. And Councilor Gary?
The aquatic center was 111. The library and the senior center added up to the additional almost 140. I have the unfair competitive advantage of living and breathing in this project, and so this just super duper to get this back in front of the group and keep moving forward. I think, as we knew when we started, the biggest challenge is finding 10 to 15 acres, which is the MacPac recommendation in McMinnville, and we're still moving forward to have a couple of viable sites is better than zero, where we were a while ago, and so I think we're making great progress, and we'll get there.
Thank you. Has anything come up over here? Yes, Councilor Peralta.
Thank you. Just the one comment, which actually I shared with you, Susan, when we met. I would think that even though MacPac took it off the table, that reevaluating the city park as an option for the rec center going back to the existing location. And then secondarily, I know we took the armory off the table as well for different reasons, but reevaluating that. And the reason for that is that I still really love the idea of having these recreation amenities downtown, and I think losing that would not necessarily be in the best long-term interest of the city. So given that we're having a challenge with, maybe we have one site right now that's not city-owned, that's a possibility or a strong possibility, that maybe that would raise those city-owned properties up in the group's evaluation a little bit.
And I'll go back and dig out the analysis that we did at Upper City Park to see if that could be a potential option. I too thought it would be great to keep it there. The challenge is the topography and the existing trees at that location, and the lack of parking. All those things make just a little bit, well, not a little bit, a lot more expensive to structure parking and that sort of thing. But I'll dig that information back up and include it in the next.
Yeah, if I may, the analysis tool, Sal, we used for Wortman, it adds up to enough acres, but it's really bad acres.
I wasn't thinking Wortman, I was thinking Upper City Park.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll address the kind of sites. Water and Light Commission has moved forward generally evaluating the question site here as a more general question of does the commission have surplus lands to sell? And so that process has been initiated. We've been through the process of getting an appraisal on that specific piece of property. And then, I don't know, Susan or Jeff, if you know or want to speak more directly, I don't want to misstate what the process would be, but I believe if the commission decides that they do have surplus lands and that they're going to surplus any of those lands for sale, then I do believe then that decision would actually come to this body for approval. Before anything else could happen. I don't want to leave with the community with the impression that there are no potential sites when we actually have a very actively engaged partner. Did I get it correct on the process?
That's my understanding, and there's a memo from the legal counsel at Mac Water and Light that describes that process, just like you said, Mayor, and also includes some of the findings that they need to make, but ultimately is a recommendation to this body.
Right. Great. My other question or concern would be kind of those projected capital costs, as you mentioned, everything's coming in high, extraordinarily high. I don't think there's any value in trying to figure out what the multiplier effect would be before we, that feels a little cart before the horse in terms of defining location, et cetera. But in your conversations about those costs, was there, MacPac could not have foreseen everything that came and affected our economy so significantly, but were there ever conversations about how much is too much, or is there a limit or an equation of, at what point it actually isn't a benefit?
In terms of the overall cost of the building and the conversation, they did, and it came out in a way that was sort of we had a financial subcommittee, and it was more, what should the budget be for the capital construction of this? And that financial committee analyzed it and made some educated guesses about what the community might be willing to support in terms of a capital bond, but nothing, Jake and our polling company was not involved in that conversation. And really, one of the things that we talked about was not to worry as much about the capital dollars as the operating dollars. And so knowing that we needed to be on pause for that, sort of pause that, what should the price tag and the budget be of the overall project? Jeff came to MacPac once and mentioned, you know, it doesn't necessarily need to be right-sized smaller. Sometimes it's building more support for things by getting more of what the community wants out there. We just haven't had those conversations yet. But MacPac definitely wanted a budget and a price tag that they could stay within. And we didn't look at it that way. We looked at it more in terms of the dream big scenario. And I think part of this right-sizing is going to start with the operating budget. What do we have? What can we maintain? And then let's right-size that building for it and find the funding for capital costs.
Great, and your operating budget includes ongoing maintenance costs?
Yes,
Great.
yes.
Counselor Peralta?
So just to clarify for the community, what we're looking at basically is, you know, kind of best case scenario, we identify a piece of land, we come up with some building designs, and then sort of contemporaneously, you're going to be figuring out what staffing level you'll need for the programming in that building. And then when we go forward with funding, we'll go forward with a bond measure that would not affect our $5 assessment. And then we'd go forward with not a levy, but an additional funding amount to cover the operating expenses that's additional.
We're starting to get into territory that you all haven't weighed in on quite yet, but I think the concept would be we would not need an operating levy. We would simply right-size the building within our existing footprint and/or the dollars and cents conversation.
So I just want to clarify though, so we're at $350 out of $5 in terms of tax assessment, and so are you thinking that some of that extra taxing authority might then go to operations?
I think we're in that process right now to figure out what do we do with that additional authority. We will not move anything forward with this project until we know what the outcome of that is. If we do not have any additional ongoing resources, financial resources for this building, that means right-sizing will look different than if we do. But what we know is we need to continue this conversation because I agree with Councilor Chenoweth. As the consultant on the first phase said, doing nothing is not an option here. We have to do something. And so if our operating budget is much smaller than, if it stays the same as what we currently have in the Parks and Rec budget footprint, that will look different than the MacPac recommendation.
Please.
Thanks. No, you're right on. That's spot on. So basically, I mean, my interpretation of this is that no matter what, we're going forward, we're going to have to go forward with some kind of capital bond to cover these building expenses, whether that's short-term maintenance and fixing up what we have, as Chris suggested, or actually going through the process and improving the buildings and improving the, you know, getting better facilities and improving the service level. Is that?
And I'll
Probably accurate.
let Jeff or Jennifer weigh in if they want, but what I think I would say is the way we have budgeted for maintenance and repairs over the last several decades has led to this position where we need to figure something new out in terms of better capital funding.
You need revenue, so it's going
Yeah.
to be, we're going to go forward for money, whether it's a little bit of money to fix up what we have or more money to improve what we have.
I think
Oh, I
that's
know, I know.
I think that's more of a Jeff question for a definitive answer, since I'm just looking at a few of those 57 buildings, but certainly there are needs, and I can also say from the Parks and Rec Open Space Master Plan, we had a $9 million bond in 2000 to help with those costs, and so we do, this is a typical municipal thing that we would do, yeah,
And just for a reminder for the community, that bond expired
2 years ago.
2 years ago, so that money going, you know, even
Rolled
just
off.
going up to that level would roll it back up. Thank you.
So just to expand a little bit, there certainly would be the possibility of a capital bond to address some of those large either new construction or improvements to existing facilities. Part of what we will be doing as we work our way through the PROS plan and our other infrastructure plans will be revisiting our systems development charge methodology, which is another potential source for capital expenses. Sort of the initial cut at operating expense had some assumptions about an amount of cost recovery that different fees and different programs could help support. Certainly, the city's existing and future levy authority and other general fund resources are out there and available. And then sort of looping back to capital, one of the things that Susan did have on the slide is the prospect for a capital campaign to leverage grant or donation dollars into the construction and potentially repair of future facilities as well. So we'll keep the options open for it as long as we can until we can come up with a concept or a series of options that you can review and vet and then give us direction on how we move forward.
But I guess realistically, there's not a scenario where we don't have to invest a lot of money in our buildings,
That's correct.
and we need additional revenue to do that. Okay.
And then I want to add one point, and then we'll go to Councilor Geary. And I think you asked our Parks and Rec director if staff was looking at the $1.50. And I think the point that I want to underline on that is that I think the intent of the Dollars and Cents campaign is that staff and council alike are looking to the community to give us that direction on those additional, on that additional taxing authority. That is the reason we put that out there, is to get that feedback first. Councilor Geary.
Thank you. Couple things. One, you had flashed a slide up about partners in terms of, that we've talked to or identified in terms of property and location. As you guys talk about operation, which is all great stuff, key to deciding on what is right, there's a whole conversation to have around partners in operational costs as well, and that'll govern not only what we think we can handle, but what we actually can afford, and it will require those partners to do that. For example, and probably the main example would be anyone who wants to operate a swim team in our community will need to be at the table having those conversations, and if we have critical mass or over-critical mass on people who want to operate not only swim clubs, not only swim teams, but large draw meets at a high enough level, that pushes us into another range of operation that will require a formal partnership for a long term. So there's this whole thing on top of all of what we're talking about is this massive sliding door where we take one step forward and we reassess all of the scenarios and what this building looks like and doesn't look like. Meanwhile, 100%, we've got ticking clocks everywhere else. And so it's just this constant reassessment of, okay, what size is the pool? Okay, how much chlorine does that take? Okay, can you come to the table and do that? No, okay, actually, we just learned about this new property, and that doesn't allow for as big of a pool. So it's just this whole thing where we got to keep having these conversations. But so you guys we're all right, and we're all in the right direction, I think. And it is complex but exciting. So I just wanted to also bring up that partnerships thing that we're going to have to do in terms of operation.
All right. Any additional questions or comments from the council? Councilor Chenoweth?
Yeah, and I just want to be, in case I wasn't clear, I'm not necessarily trying to be disparaging toward the concept of new facilities. I'm just trying to be cognizant, as a building owner or business owner, you watch your assets depreciate if you don't maintain them. And I just want to make sure that we're not making the mistake of assuming we're going to accomplish something and as a result forcing ourselves that direction, whether we can accomplish it or not. I'm old enough to remember a day when Mac Pool had both an outdoor pool and an indoor pool. And that was a big part of my younger years. So I'm definitely not an enemy of the pool, and I don't want it to come across that that's what I'm saying in my comments.
And as an active current user of both facilities, the pool and the community center, the carpet is appreciated, and the staff at the community center manages the issues well, that if you didn't know to look up, you know, and so I think they're long-term big things, but
Thank you.
we're able to have a good usable facility.
Thank you. Council President. He's on
Yeah,
Zoom.
lots of good comments tonight. Definitely appreciate everybody's thoughts in the presentation, Susan. I think where I land is just really making sure that we wait for the dollars and cents data to come back and see where the community's at on the value matrix. I mean, I'm real excited about the potential for new facilities, but not knowing where that's going to come back. I've already filled out that survey. I hope everybody on the dais has as well, and any public in the room. But I think really we got to let that drive the conversation as far as before we right size these facilities, because that's really going to give us a data point to know what we have for a revenue possibility. And I would be hard pressed to go out for anything above that $1.50 as far as like an operating levy or anything else. So that's not something I have much of an appetite for at this point in time.
Thank you. And I think I'll just add the dollars and cents campaign that we're referencing. This is the community's new engagement tool on how to bring the additional taxing authority back online after we take this 1-year pause, which is what the community told us was wanted. If you haven't had the opportunity to start with the dollars and cents campaign, you can go to our website. There's a bubble on the front page. You can click through to that. Hopefully, everyone has their iheartmac.org account. That is our community engagement platform that you can dive pretty deep into anything the council is spending money on or projects that we're undertaking, and you can track our progress, dollars spent, where they're coming from, where they're going. And then in addition, we're going to be having a number of in-person opportunities, and we're doing that for with this dollars and cents campaign for a number of reasons, including accessibility. And so if you need assistance, technical assistance, or don't have access to a computer, aren't able to use one, we have a number of times when we'll be doing in-person events and doing our best to get that information out to the public. And then we're also doing some additional in-person meetings to talk about the dollars and cents campaign. So we are really hoping to get broad community engagement, as always. Yeah. All right. Anything else?
Let's go for a swim.
All right, well, wonderful. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to close the work session at 6:42 p.m. We will take a little break and come back and start our regular meeting at 7 p.m.
Recording stopped.
I was just saying that, if we have $1.50.
Recording in progress.
Good evening and welcome to the July 25th, 2023 meeting of the McMinnville City Council. I would like to call the meeting to order and ask Councilor Chenoweth to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you very much. And would our City Recorder, Claudia Cisneros, please do a roll call?
Counselor Geary,
Good evening.
Counselor Minke,
Present.
Counselor Chenoweth,
Present.
Counselor Peralta.
Here.
Counselor Payne is absent this evening. Council President Garvin.
Here.
Mayor Drabkin.
Here, thank you very much. We are now to the portion of the evening where we will take comments from community members. Any interested audience members are invited to provide comments, and any comment provided that requires some type of follow-up will be assigned to a staff member. Anyone may speak on any topic other than a matter in litigation, a quasi-judicial land use matter, or a matter scheduled for public hearing at some future date. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person for a total of 30 minutes. If you're on Zoom and you wish to speak, please use the raise your hand feature, and when your turn is up, we will announce your name and unmute your mic, or you may send a chat directly to our City Recorder, Claudia Cisneros, and we will announce you. Has anyone signed up for public comment this evening?
No one has signed up, but I do want to state for the record, Kim Morris sent a letter on behalf of the McMinnville Community Task Force that was emailed to the council, and we will put into public record and make it published tomorrow, amended packet.
Thank you. Is anybody in the audience that would like to add public comment this evening? Is there anyone on Zoom that would like to provide any public comment this evening? And is there anyone on the phone at all? No. Okay. Thank you so much. We're now going to our consent agenda. Does any counselor request to have any item removed from the consent agenda? Not hearing any, I would ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Counselor Menke and a second from Counselor Geary. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, say nay. And the consent agenda passes unanimously. We are now going to consider resolution number 2023-46, a resolution authorizing city staff to apply for a transportation growth management grant to help fund updating the McMinnville Transportation System Plan. And I'd like to call on our Community Development Director, Heather Richards, to present.
Thank you, Mayor and Councilor. So We have had updating our transportation system plan on our growth management work plan for planning for the last couple of years. It has been delayed by a couple of years due to staffing resources in both the planning and engineering departments. This is a fairly big lift for both of those departments, and we wanted to get them fully staffed before we went out with that RFP. What it has done, though, it has provided us the opportunity to apply for this biennium's Transportation Growth Management Program for grant funds. They fund transportation system plan updates, and they fund transportation and land use plans. And if you recall, they were the funder for our recent 3 Mile Lane area plan process. We'd like to submit a grant application to them for $225,000. We anticipate the transportation system plan update will be about $450,000 with additional $25,000 in-kind staff support. So our match will be 50%. We do have $400,000 budgeted in our transportation fund right now to support this project, but we also have had additional transportation needs that have come up as well, where we will need to shuffle some of those funds in that direction. So this TGM grant will be very important for us in terms of being able to bring this project online. The reason it's $450,000 is we want to do a much more in-depth look at not only our vehicular transportation projects that we need to support growth planning, both in our UGB areas, but also what we see as impactful to our existing system. But we also want to do a much more in-depth evaluation, analysis, and planning for other modal infrastructure systems, such as off-street bike ped systems, on-street bike ped systems, transit, and other systems as well that support our active trans plan. Additionally, we're going to be submitting into our grant process a more in-depth look on how to bring the 3 Mile Lane area plan transportation projects that were identified in that plan into our TSP process, so it's a more comprehensive process. And finally, we want to do an SDC methodology so that we come out of this process with a capital improvement plan and an recommended SDC methodology for implementing that. So it's going to be a much more comprehensive look than what we've done in the past. I think McMinnville's at the size where we need to be doing that, and it will be more expensive than what we have invested in the past as well. But we're hoping that this program will come in as a match for our city funds.
Thank you. Council discussion? Councilor Chenoweth.
Yeah, in terms of this planning, what's it going to take off of our ability to plan for things that we currently have on schedule? You know, for instance, I've asked a few times to see if we could get perhaps something in place that would fund parking downtown for businesses that are for development that is not providing the parking. Little projects like that. Are we taking the stuff that we actually need to move the ball forward in the community away to do this higher end planning? Or is this you're going to bring on more staff to supplement that?
So this plan has actually been in our work plan for the last 2 years, and it's one of our priority projects that we've had in our work plan. It's been delayed due to staffing capacity that we've had in both of those departments. But updating our transportation system plan is something that's mandated by the state after you go through a UGB process. We need to provide the public facility planning for those additional lands that we brought into the UGB. We'll need to have that in place as we go through, as we start bringing land into the city for housing development. So I wouldn't say that this is additive to the plan that will be replacing other efforts. This is already in a priority position in our work plan, and to bring other additional efforts such as what you just described into our work plan, that would be a conversation as to resources and how to bring that online.
So, but you just said you want to increase the scope of the plan that was already in the pipeline. that would be adding more work to the plan, would it not?
No, and I'm sorry if I misled you in that regard. We have always intended it to be this larger scope of work for this current transportation system plan update. It will be an increased scope of work from what we did previously back in 2008, 9, and 10, and adopted in 2010. So what we will come out with for a transportation system plan document will be much more comprehensive than what we have today, guiding our transportation infrastructure system. And I think will serve this community better because we'll be able to fund additional infrastructure projects with that funding methodology. We've always planned for that. We've always been talking about carrying the cost for doing this planning work in the budget. That's why there's $400,000 in the budget today, in the adopted budget for fiscal year 23-24. So that scope hasn't changed.
Okay. As you know, I really would like to see this move forward. I think Councilor Geary was the first person I heard mention the idea of having some sort of funding mechanism in place for development downtown, where if they're not providing parking, they had to provide some sort of dollars to a public fund to increase parking for downtown. And given what's happening with the 3rd Street remodel that we're going to be doing, we're going to be losing parking in that process downtown. So I really want, this is my opportunity to make a plug from the dais to get this done. And so I'm taking my opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Council discussion? Additional? Councilor Peralta?
Thanks. Heather? Thanks, sorry to interrupt. Just a couple of questions. Can you remind the board and I guess the community, what role do these master planning documents play in obtaining long-term funding to complete these projects?
These documents are foundational to obtaining long-term funding for large transportation improvement projects, large and small, quite frankly. So coming out of this process, we'll have a list of projects that we need to serve this community for growth over the next 20 years to 2041 based on our population numbers. And that list of projects will then be identified as to what will be funded through new development, so supporting new growth in our community, and presumably that will be a decision-making process for the city council, but you have historically in the last couple of years said that development pays for development, and so that would be in a system development charge methodology to pay for those improvement projects. And then to be able to go after grant funds from other sources, having it identified in your TSP as part of your capital improvement plan is imperative to going after additional grant funds from other sources.
Thank you. And the main thrust of this is going to be to essentially redevelop existing infrastructure for multimodal uses and increasing safety, like safer routes to schools and things like that.
I would say that's one of the main thrusts. I mean, there will be several in there. So yes, safe routes to school will come out of sort of the multimodal discussion, which is often either on-street or off-street bike ped mobility, so separated bike ped paths or sidewalks and bike lanes. And then also, I think the transportation planning for the 663 acres of land that just came into the city's UGB that we're counting on for housing development will be a big piece of this as well. And then we have, I mean, the community knows well and communicates with us often that we have some links in our system that aren't working due to congestion. And so it will be looking at those different types of intersections and how to alleviate congestion at those intersections by redirecting traffic somewhere else to get where they need to go. And then we'll probably be doing some deeper dives into some specific areas of the community. So the 3 Mile Lane area is one, but also perhaps the city center, because that's where we are seeing some congestion at 2nd and 5th Street, but looking more comprehensively at how traffic moves around in McMinnville today.
Thank you. Last question, if I may. Can you remind us on the dais, because I just don't remember, what kinds of projects can SDCs be applied to versus not applied to in terms of capital projects?
Yeah, so they actually can be applied to all those projects we just described if it is demonstrated that those projects are needed due to the additional growth that's coming to the community. So SDCs are charged to new development. and they're charged a new development system development charges to offset the impact of that new development on the system. So if it's shown through the transportation system planning process that the new development is putting more cars on the street per se, and that we need improvements to accommodate that. So we need the obvious one is new streets, so everyone understands that piece of it. But if there's an intersection that's currently performing at a certain capacity, but we bring on this much more population into our community, and the system our modeling shows that there's going to drive more cars to that intersection, and we need to do improvements there, the SDCs can contribute to what those improvements are based on that new growth. And the same can happen for the bike ped infrastructure. There's a lot of communities funding bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure through SDCs as well, because it's done for two reasons. One, that there's new growth using the system, but also bringing those people off of the roads and using these alternative methods of transportation is also improving the system.
Thank you. And just to put a cap on it, because I think you mentioned it, that when we have SDCs covering these costs, then those costs are not being claimed from the general fund. So new development is paying for new development, not the existing tax base.
Yes, yes, and also not general obligation bonds, right? So there's many different ways to pay for transportation, and SDCs are a primary way to pay for transportation impact due to new growth in your community.
Thanks for the education.
Thank you. Any additional council discussion? Thank you. I would now consider or ask for a motion to approve resolution number 2023-46.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilor Geary and a second from Councilor Peralta. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Thank you. And those opposed say nay. And the resolution has passed unanimously. And we will now consider resolution number 2023-47, a resolution authorizing city staff to apply for a Department of Land Conservation and Development Technical Assistance Grant to help fund state-mandated housing growth planning. And we'll again look to our Community Development Director, Heather Richards, to present.
Thank you. So this is another opportunity to apply for grant funds to help us with our current work plan that we already have in play of planning that we need to do at the city of McMinnville. This is for the housing planning that we brought to you in a work session a couple of weeks ago that we need to do next year and the following year. So we are, by mandate of the state, need to do a housing production strategy and submit that to the state by the end of next calendar year, December 31, 2024. We also have a housing needs analysis that shows land need, and we need to show how we're going to meet that. We want to go through a process of land use efficiencies to see if we can meet that within our existing boundaries by evaluating how we apply our regulatory framework and our density of development within our community. And then if we still have the need for additional land need after going through that process, we will need to go through a UGB amendment. We're currently in the process of entering into a work task program with the state to do those two tasks, the land use efficiencies by the end of 2024 and the UGB amendment by the end of 2025 as part of our sequential UGB process because we don't have the time to do that before the end of this calendar year when we submit our need analysis. Typically, you submit the need analysis and show how you're going to meet the need at the same time. We've calculated the costs for that for you in the past as a policy body, what it will take to fund that. We calculated it as $500,000. That includes both consultant fees and staff support. And we're asking DLCD to provide $200,000 in grants to help offset the consulting fees for that. We will then have additional consulting fees that we'll match that with, and then we'll have staff support as well. We're showing a match for this grant of a 60% local match for our requests. The DLCD housing assistance grants are typically, I see them come out between the form of $50,000 to $150,000. We're going to be asking for on the higher end of what they are going to receive as applications. But we do have a lot of work in front of us. We're a smaller community, and so I think we have the opportunity to be successful at that. So I'm recommending we make that application. And this also needs to show support from the city council via resolution for the grant application.
Thank you. We'll go to some conversation here. Councillor Chenoweth?
Yeah, so if they, would the process be if they decide not to grant it because the amount was too high that we asked for, that they would come back with a lower amount? Or would we be just, because we asked too high, they say it's either yes or no on the amount we've asked for?
No, they have typically come back, so we've applied and been successful in the past through this program. And if they can't fund all their requests that they get, they typically will get back with the applicants to see, you know, if we grant you this much, can you still move your program forward? So
Okay.
I don't suspect we'll be cut out of the process entirely because we asked for 200,000.
And thank you for your work in identifying creative ways to offset some of these costs that are coming to us through mandates from the state.
Additional council discussion? Not hearing any, I would ask for a motion to approve resolution number 2023-47.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Councillor Peralta and a second from Councillor, I don't know, it was a tie. Mankey. Thank you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. And the resolution has passed unanimously. We'll now go to advice and information items, starting with reports from councilors on committees and board assignments. Councillor Geary, will you start, please?
Yeah, nothing to report.
Thank you. Councillor Chenoweth?
Parkway didn't meet. MEVLC did meet. We are working through our priorities for the next year, and we haven't completed an approval of what those look like, so I don't have those definitively yet. I will bring that to you at the next report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Peralta?
No report. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Menke?
Affordable housing tomorrow at 10. I think we're doing a Fox Ridge Road meeting on August 3rd. And affordable, we had a YCAP meeting today, but I'll report on that next time because there's too much to unpack for this one.
Okay, thank you. And Council President Garvin?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. WICOM hasn't met, Airport Commission hasn't met, but we do have some jumping going on out there. So if you want to see some skydivers, that's going on today. Well, it went on today, tomorrow, and Thursday from I think 9 to 3 roughly. And visit McMinnville, a lot to unpack there, and I'm candidly don't have my notes from that meeting in front of me, so I will do that at our next council meeting. And fire district stuff's moving forward with legal stuff, and we're working on our fire chief recruitment process and working with Vicki from HR on that. So that's moving forward, and we meet the second, third, and fourth Thursday of every month at 6 p.m. at Station 1. If you don't have enough meetings on your calendar already, come join us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we appreciated the letter we received from the new board president, thanking the city for your partnership and moving that forward. So thank you, Council Board President Garvin.
Get all those titles in.
Get all of those in. We are looking forward to a couple of visits from our congressional delegation. Congresswoman Salinas will be visiting McMinnville twice over the next approximately month. So we're looking forward to that. And then as a reminder, McMinnville Water and Light Watershed Tour for electeds is August 9th. If you hadn't had a chance to RSVP, we do have wonderful attendance. So far, we have our state representatives from both District 23 and 24. So Representative Elmer Ann Scharf. We have our Commissioner Johnston, who's in the back of the room, is also joining us on the Watershed Tour. Let's see. 27 other people so far. So I won't remember all of them at the moment, but if you have not RSVP'd, our Community Development Director will be there. So if you haven't had an opportunity to RSVP, please do. It should be a great tour. And with that, we'll go to department head reports, starting with our city manager, Jeff Towery.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to let you know, I'll follow up with an email later on. I'll be on personal leave actually the week before Labor Day, so end of August, early September. Thank you.
Thank you. Interim City Attorney Walt Gowell.
Report tonight, Mayor.
Thank you. Community Development Director Heather Richards.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to update you on our 3rd Street improvement project. I am here representing a larger city team, Ann Pagano, our Public Works Director, James Lofton, our city engineer, Jeff Gooden, who is in our engineering department as a project manager, will be leading this project moving forward, and Jody Christensen, our special projects manager in the community development department, will be co-leading with him. What we wanted to do is come to you as City Council and let you know where we're at in the project and what the next steps are. So we went out for an RFP for a consultant team to bring us to 30% construction documents for this project. What that means is we're going to be taking the concept plan, the concept design that came out of the public process a year ago this time, and start doing the engineering for it. So really doing the truth testing and the surveying and understanding what the utilities are underground and things of that nature. So there's a lot of sleuthing as part of this project, as part of this phase. There's discovery, and then there's sort of putting the foundation together for the design itself. With the RFP, we had a lead team that we're working with right now to negotiate a scope of work and contract. They are called BKF engineers, and they put together subcontractors on their team, some of which are familiar with this project and you're familiar with them, and some new consultants as well. So it's a good mix, and they were the unanimous choice of all the reviewers. We're in the process of negotiating that scope of work and that contract. We're towards the end of that, and we'll be bringing that, if successful with negotiations, we'll be bringing that to you on August 8th during your business meeting for approval. And then after that, we will launch the project in a similar form that we've done in the past, where we'll have a project advisory committee that's comprised of a citizen advisory committee and technical advisory committee, and then our internal project management team working with the consultant team as well. So Jeff will be presenting to you the contract on August 8th if we're successful with that, and I feel confident we will be. And you'll be able to see him in his lead as the project manager, and Jody will be here that evening too. But I wanted to update you on where we're at with that process. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Finance Director Jennifer Cuellar.
Nothing to report this evening, thanks.
Thank you. City Recorder Claudia Cisneros.
Yes, just want to remind everyone of next Tuesday, August 1st, the National Night Out starts at 5 p.m. at the Discovery Meadows Community Park. We'll have city staff there doing the dollars and cents survey, so if you haven't had a moment to take it, come to the National Night Out and hear more about it, and have staff there to answer any questions.
Wonderful, thank you. Meeting is adjourned, 7:27 p.m.
Ready to get home, Tom?